Okay, we had a little short break there, which wasn't scheduled, but the next door neighbor had his lawn guys over there doing the lawn for the last 20 minutes. So we're going to restart my story. But after we had made that second pass, I guess it was obvious to Buck. I was a little bit worn out mentally, trying to be exact and all of that. So he stopped and we just sat there and talked for a minute. And he said, you know, I can see where this is sort of working on you a little bit. He said, but it's necessary. He said, you've got to develop that feel. It's just as important as almost anything else that we could talk about. Feeling the lure on the bottom of the lake, staying in contact, and keeping that lure in the designed depth it's supposed to be running. It's important. He said, in catching fish, it's extremely important that your lure is in position on the troll. He said, but in your subsequent mapping of structure, if you don't have the ability to follow that break line exactly, you'll never get the true size and shape of the structure. It's the break lines that are forming the structure. And we just had this big long study about structure. So when Buck was telling me, he said, in your mapping interpretation, it's critical. This skill that you have to develop. So he said, I'm telling you this, but I also want to remind you, you think you're having it tough right now. We've only been here a couple of hours. He said, when I developed all of my theories back in the day, he said, I realized I needed a lure that would go to different depths so I could start to confirm my theories and turn them from theory into fact. But there were no depth sounders back in those days. I didn't invent the first depth sounder, he said, until quite a few years later. He said, but in 1946, I developed these lures. And he said, all of my discoveries I made by feeling the bottom of the lake. And you know, I never really knew that. I don't think he'd ever mentioned it before. And now his discoveries boggle my mind even more. I couldn't believe that. Oh yeah, that's right. Back when you made these discoveries and told the fishing world all about the deep water tendencies of a fish and how they utilize bottom features when they move about in the lake, you did that all by feel. No depth sounders. And now I was even more amazed at everything he said and done and all of his contributions to the sport. Most of it was formulated all by feeling the bottom of the lake. So now all of a sudden I felt like this little 2 or 3 or 4 passes on this dam, feeling the lures and making my passes without a depth sounder. I didn't feel nearly as trampled upon after he told me that story about how he made all his discoveries. So we continued to fish then, and we had to work deeper. He wanted to make sure that we got down to the base break line. Every dam has an end to that rocky riprap. It ends at some depth. And it has that base break line that must be fished. So we continued to fish all the way down 700, 800, the deeper depths. And he still was forcing me to do it by feel. If the lure started plowing, I had to turn out. If it came to start free running, I'm losing my bump, then I had to turn her back in. So in this entire 2-day event, I was running the boat for Buck Perry without a depth sounder, never turned the depth sounder on, never even put it in the boat the second day. And I asked him at the end of our 2-day affair if he felt that I had made some improvement in my trolling. I was hoping I could get a compliment from him. But he said, I think you did pretty good. He said, but the real test is, he said, I didn't count exactly, but we caught about 250 bass. I said, yeah, because we were catching fish for 2 days. They were there. And when we had our lures in position, obviously, we were catching the fish. And there were a few spots along that dam, like in any dam. There are a few spots that'll be hot spots along the dam. And normally once you hit a fish on the troll, and then you swing back and you hit a second fish in the same spot while you're trolling a dam or a causeway, then you're going to go to the cast immediately. Well, we didn't do that on this trip. the primary reason for this whole 2-day affair was that he was trying to make me a skilled troller rather than just a troller. And he wanted to do it in 2 days. So the catching the fish was just confirmation that we were doing a pretty good job while trolling that that dam. Now, we started with causeways. Same exact thing. We have rocky riprap and so on and so forth, and there are many of these causeways like at Wren Lake, about 3 miles. So same idea. We're fishing it all the same way. And of course, when you have the advantage of a depth sonder, it's fine to use one. But if you are fishing reservoirs, you should spend some time on every fishing day, not just in order to catch fish, but to practice your trolling skills. Because in the end, it's by far the hardest thing to do when it comes to the mechanics of fishing. Trolling or casting, no question. A skilled troller, few and far between. Good casters, dime a dozen. At any rate, we had a good old time. I worked hard for over those 2 days, but we caught a bunch of fish. But I did learn an important lesson. Got to fish the dams. They're guaranteed. One of the reasons I was always able to make those comments to the outdoor writers and stuff when I was promoting, that take me to any reservoir, you choose it and guaranteed be catching fish in an hour, because I knew the dams and the causeways and all of these man-made structures that we talked about actually are going to produce fish. They're clean, workable areas, and they're all guarantees. Now, how the fish move and the weather and water conditions and so on and so forth, that all plays a part in it. And we're going to investigate all of that in our future talks. But there's one other thing I wanted to mention to you. About 15 years after that weekend with Buck on Grenada, I got to thinking, because I was doing some other work on structure. And like we just studied over this, whatever it's been here, a month, 5 or 6 weeks on our study on structure. I remembered the Grenada situation where they pulled the lake down like 30, 35 feet. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to go out and film some of these structures that are now out of water, in the late fall, of course. During the winter pool, these structures are out of water, and it's big stuff. I mean, there's islands, there's humps, there's bars, there's all kind of good stuff that I could show and put it on film and say, this is what structure really looks like. And it really is structure, and it really is productive structure. And we could go out there, I could put some boots on, go out there walking in the mud, whatever it takes, but just to make some sort of a video on Grenada. And I did. And I thought it'd be great to go fish that dam again and catch a bunch of big bass. Well, I was surprised. When we went out there, it was really cold. And I couldn't remember whether we were a little bit later than the time before or a little bit earlier, but the big fish weren't in there. We caught a bunch of 2.5 pounders while we were there, but the main reason I was there, the main reason I made the trip, was to shoot this film. And we did shoot it, and it's on my channel. And the heck did I call it? What does structure really look like? I think that's the name of it. If you look it up, it's on my channel. Look it up and take a look at that, and that'll put a lot of what we've talked about here over the last few weeks, a lot of that be in perspective. You'll be able to see it. Oh, wait a minute. Just about the time that the long guy quit, now a boat's going by. So, I'm sure that we're going to get to the end of this. But in concluding our discussion on structure, had to finish with the dams, but there is a couple we haven't mentioned, and I want to mention them right now. First is a wing dam. Now, wing dams are sort of mini dams. Today we're talking about Grenada's riprap, and you know this rocky riprap stretches about 3-4 miles, but a wing dam just comes out into the water a little ways, a partway dam. And they're found in rivers, in the big rivers. Like the Mississippi has thousands of wing dams. And they were actually built way back at the turn, I think, of the century. Most of them were built. And the reason for it was to eliminate some of the shoreline erosion. But the most important thing was that the current in the river would come out, hit that dam, and turn out into the main flow and keep the deep channel with enough depth of water in it for all of the commercial stuff to be able to operate. Because the Mississippi River, you probably don't know this, but I think they're doing about 75 to 85 million tons of cargo is back and forth on that river every year. So they need to make sure that they had enough depth in the main channel. So they had put all these wing dams in there, and of course they're made just like, most of them are made out of rocks, just like the dam would be that we're fishing today. And some of them, on the other hand, are made out of concrete. And if you're fishing the big rivers, be sure that you be careful and watch for the wing dams, because many of them are just underneath the surface. You'll be able to tell, but you'll see the riffles on the lower side. And most of the fish, and Buck introduced me to wing dams by fishing in Mississippi, northern Mississippi. We were up actually looking at some stuff for a summer school way back early in the day, and we were looking up there around Lake Pepin, which is a widening of the river, the Mississippi River, and that was my introduction to wing dams. And of course, so we fished them and caught white bass, caught sauger, caught walleye, mainly known for catching walleye. And most of the fish are caught on the upstream side of those wing dams. And they're not very large, they don't reach big, long distances, so they're, most of the time, they're best fished by casting, as opposed to what we've been talking about today, which all this trolling. So that's wing dams. But if you're not fishing the Mississippi River, you're probably not going to be too concerned about that. And the other one we didn't talk about was breakwaters. Now, breakwaters are just rocky riprap that are formed, to protect the marinas, protect some beach areas and shorelines. Of course, there's a lot of that in the salt. But there's also on the Great Lakes, there's a lot of, any big lake, you'll be able to find these breakwaters. And they're just fish attractors. And I fish them just like I fish any other dam, any other riprap. There's no big deal about it, but it's something that you probably won't be seeing too much. So I mentioned them and what they are and what the reasons were. However, it's something that you probably won't be fishing much. But that pretty much takes care of all 17, with one other exception. I can't remember whether or not I talked about reefs. The reefs occur in natural lakes, in the big lakes. For the most part, big natural lakes. And I think maybe I did, but I can't be sure. So before I leave, I don't want somebody to say you only talked about 16. You didn't talk about 17. So I'm going to just give you a little refresher on what a reef is. A reef is simply rocky outcroppings that occur in a big flat area. Let's say, I'm going to give you an example of one that I fished at Lake Erie. A huge reef reaching way out in the lake. And it's just flat areas, but there are rock outcroppings in one area, quite wide, probably 150 yards wide. There's all these rock outcroppings, and mainly they were established at a different time in history with a different water level. And we're still looking for break lines, but the rocky reefs actually are the structure that we're forming our opinion on in that case. And I found them in Lake Ontario when I fished Lake Ontario. Found some really great reefs in Lake Erie, and there's fish all over them. I mean, they're just all over them. So in many cases, those reefs will reach way out, maybe a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles out into the lake. And when you find a good reef, you need to fish them. But you're still looking for the break lines off of those reefs. And sometimes it doesn't break very hard. It may only break a couple of feet. But we still have all of that rock down there, and that's where you find your fish. So that covers all 17 of the structure types. We've identified them. So when we go fishing from this point on, whether it's natural lakes, reservoirs, we're going to eliminate all that unproductive water. We know what we're looking for before we go out there. Now, don't be looking for an underwater roadbed or a dam or a causeway in a natural lake in upper Minnesota. You won't find it. So you got to use a little common sense too. But we know what we're looking for out there now. If it's a Florida type lake, we're looking for one-sided bars and slots and deep water. The whole lesson was about eliminating the unproductive stuff up here before we launched the boat. So once we launch in your lake or in your reservoir, we know what we're looking for. So when we come upon it, when we find it, when we see it, we're going to recognize it. And then all is left is to go fishing. So I hope that this whole study on structure cleared a bunch of stuff up for you. Now, as we move on to our next master class, the title is The Mechanics of Fishing. Now, within the mechanics of fishing, we're going to include the controls that we must use in order to actually catch the fish. Once we arrive at these structures where the fish are, we have to be able to control some parts of our fishing in order to catch them. So I'm going to be talking about the important controls in fishing. Then I'm going to talk about some of the tools. This would be included, some of the tools that we need to control our controls to get it done. And then I'm also going to include in that the true mechanics of fishing, which is casting and trolling. And I'm going to go into detail about it. And then after we talk about that, we're going to talk about presentation of lures, the real details of it, so that once we go out there with our newfound knowledge of how to locate these structures, we'll know what we have to do in order to put fish in the boat. And in the end, that's what we want. That's why we're all in this game, is to catch fish. Catching fish is fun. I never really had anybody in the boat ever that didn't enjoy catching fish. What we don't like as a overall group of people, what we don't like is not catching fish. We like catching. That's the fun part, and that's what all this is all about. So we can fill our head with all of the important information and then learn the mechanical skills that it takes to put fish in the boat. And then we're going to, once we get to that point, then we're going to start sharing all that information with everybody we know so that everybody can enjoy the sport the way that we do. So thanks for joining me today. I want you to be sure to like us on Facebook. And whatever you do, please share this video vlog with all of your friends and encourage them to share it with their friends. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I really appreciate you. And I'll see you the next time when we begin our study, our master class on the mechanics of fishing.